Just want to let y'all know that I love living in Alabama. Good football over there. But it's great to be back in the Republic of Texas. Well, I like coming back here where there's plenty of pigs and whitetail to take care of. You know, I was so impressed with Dina's talk, her personal witness, and that gives a window into the individual worlds that we enter when we get to know people who are in prison. As we get to know any other individual, people outside of prison as well. We're opened up into a world of lots of vulnerability and difficulties, sin, and redemption. And we do so with the idea that we want to share that redemption. That's what we do, and it's a great privilege. But I'd also like to talk about, and this is what, as I considered, what I'd say here at this conference, I wanted to talk more about some of an overview that we also come into contact with. Too few people in our society study philosophy, but philosophy has all kinds of effects on the way we think. Ideas from various philosophers come into our world. And especially at certain levels at the universities, but also into politics and business and other areas, entertainment. These philosophies, whether people know where they come from or not, have a big impact. And I'd like just to give that overview. I'm a good example of this. You mentioned I'm a Jesuit, and I heard early on a story about this lady went bragging to her pastor that her son just entered the seminary. And the pastor said, "Oh, great, which one?" And she said, "Oh, I forgot to ask." So the pastor said, "Well, if he's going to be a priest for the diocese, he'll be in the seminary for 8 years. If he's going to be a Dominican, he'll be in the seminary for 10 years. And if he's going to be a Jesuit, he'll be in there for 13 years. I said, "Oh, Father, I'm sure he's a Jesuit. He's always been a slow learner." When I finished school and added it all up, I finally finished in the 27th grade. So I like these kind of questions and about philosophy and such. And we have to recognize that our society is trying to undermine the effects of Christianity in any way it can. We are outside the public discourse. The Supreme Court made it illegal to even display the Ten Commandments back in 1982. The Supreme Court made it illegal to pray or read sacred scripture in public schools. And that has gone into the rest of the public discourse, so that at the Denver, Colorado Christmas parade, they forbade a float showing the nativity because that was not relevant to Christmas. That's a true story. And this removal of Christianity then gets put back against Christianity when a horrible disaster like in Uvalde or in other places comes along and they say, "Yeah, well, where was your God to protect those kids?" this is thrown up against us. After they've done everything they could to keep God out of those schools, they did everything they could to prevent those students ever hearing the words, "Thou shalt not kill." They're not allowed to see that phrase in school. And then they want to blame God. This kind of onslaught against Christianity is very strong. It's also against Judaism. That right now Islam is favored, for now, by folks on the progressive side, because they see them as an ally against Judaism and Christianity. Not because they like Islam or even know anything about it. They just see the enemy of my enemy is my friend. That's their principle. And that gets, by the way, they don't realize that according to Surah 9, any atheist also either must submit to Islam, to Allah, and become a Muslim, or have his head cut off. They don't cite that verse. Again, they're not focused on the whole picture. We see all kinds of attacks on Christianity because they're still upset about the Galileo affair, even though, of course, we accept that the earth goes around the sun. And, you know, when they criticize us for having had some problems with Galileo's science, when in fact some of his reasoning was not quite right. I don't know if you knew this, but he tried to say that proof for the earth going around the sun was the tides. Now you all live close enough to the coast to know that's not true. It's the moon going around the earth. It's an earth-centric issue of the moon going. That's what makes our tides, not the sun. But despite Galileo's faulty reasoning, he was correct. And then we see them, oftentimes on the left, who anybody who has scientific questions or statements that disagree with their political agenda is automatically rejected and canceled. That they are doing to other scientists what they say we did to Galileo. This is something very important to pay attention to, because in general, those things that the progressive side of our country and of Western society, those things that they criticize their enemies of doing are usually exactly what they are doing. Pay attention to that. It's almost a principle. And just always, when you see them attacking certain things, stay alert and say, what are those folks up to? That they point that out as a way to distract you from them doing the very thing they are doing. Just keep it as an alert. It's worth doing. Now, at this point, the number one approach that is taken against us and is applied in so many levels in our society, government, entertainment, and popular thought, education, is called relativism. Relativism permeates our society. The basic belief is of two kinds. One, either there is no such thing as objective truth, or two, the more moderate form of it, we don't know if there's objective truth, but if there is, we can't find it out. Okay? Those are the two forms it takes. There is no such thing as objective truth, or if there is, we'll never know. Now, here's a very important principle to understand. Always take a look and see how they are undoing themselves. Here's why. To say that there is no such thing as objective truth is a very objectively stated principle. And to say that you can't know truth, well then, how do you know that you can't know it? That's also a pretty objective statement. And I don't do it only, in part, I do like hoisting them up on their own petards, because it's fun, easy, and something you can do frequently. But this is the more important point. It indicates their inability to see the inherent failure of their thought. They are totally unaware that they are absolutely sure that it's objectively true, that there is no objective truth. This is self-contradiction. The best you could do as a relativist, I don't know if there's any objective truth, and I don't know how to find it, but that's it. In other words, you can profess ignorance, but you cannot be positive that there is no objective truth and still be a relativist. And that lack of self-awareness permeates the rest of their thought. This is very, very important. Now, one of the points that they're very sure of is there's no God, or if there is a God, it's dangerous. How many of you have heard in your lifetime that religion is the biggest cause of war in history? Raise your hands if you've heard that. Let me ask this. Anybody here never hear that? Anybody not hear that? And so they make these statements, and this is typical of the relativists and the opponents of religion. Where's your evidence? Well, the Crusades. Okay. How many people died in the Crusades? Do you know? 650,000. In fact, I've read both the Crusaders' Chronicles and the Muslim Chronicles of the Crusades. Battles had maybe 1,200, 1,500 people die. They really didn't want to kill many people. If anything, religion helped reduce the number of people who died in those wars. They preferred to capture people and hold them for ransom. And they knew that they could get them back. And they would exchange prisoners, ransom on both sides throughout the Crusades. So in 250 years of the Crusades, 650,000 people died. Are you aware that in the 4 years of the war between the states, which was started by the Democrats, 700,000 people died in 4 years? And in the history of Christianity as a whole, how many died in all the wars? The 30 Years' War, you can't even count as a religious war. It was a war over different families trying to take over the Holy Roman Empire. That's what it was about. It wasn't about religion. And so if you take a look at the various wars for the Protestant Reformation, the Crusades, and all the other religious wars of Christianity, the number of people who died in those wars is about 2.5 million, and that's generous. I'm giving a little bit extra, just in case we miss something. Whereas in the French Revolution, which was fought to have pure reason without God, well, with God, they believed in God, but it was a God of pure reason. In fact, they desecrated Notre Dame Cathedral. They put a prostitute that they seated on a chair on top of the main altar, and they said, "Hail, Lady of Reason." And it mocked the rosary as they did that. In the French Revolution and subsequent Napoleonic Wars, more people died than in 2,000 years of Christian wars. And when you get to the 20th century, when you had nationalistic governments that put the nation ahead of God, ahead of religion, and then communism and National Socialism, the Nazis. When you take the wars between 1914 and the year 2000, the number of people who died in those wars and the widespread executions under the Marxists, it adds up to 305 million people. In 86 years, nearly 150 times as many people were killed in the name of government, and especially in the name of atheism, as died in all the Christian wars. This is an amazing thing. And so I say to them, give me your facts. I'll give you the facts. And I didn't make those up. I got them from the University of Hawaii. Hardly a conservative or Christian place of learning. But they could not help but deal with the fact the KGB revealed that under Soviet Union times, their government executed 61.9 million of their own people. This is the reality of the 20th century. The most violent century, the century in which there were more martyrs than in the previous 19 centuries. Did you know that? For the first 1900 years of Christianity, 35 million people were martyred for the faith in Christ. In the 20th century, 40 million were martyred. And this is the reality of how they are so opposed to Christianity and become murderous. On one hand, the attraction of this philosophy that there is no such thing as objective truth. The attraction of it is, well, you have your truth, and you have your truth, you have your truth, I have my truth, and we'll all agree to get along. It sounds beautiful. Until you come to a crossroads. And I like to put this in perspective. Imagine two automobiles come to a crossroads. Which one goes first? In our present world, where there are rules, it's the first one who came to the stop sign or the one who has the green light, right? In a relativist world, well, just because my light is red and yours is green doesn't mean that you should go ahead of me. And in that world, who gets to go first? The Humvee or the little electric car? That's where it comes down to it. It's going to be the Humvee, isn't it? The little electric car is going to save battery space. And they're going to let the Humvee go through. Why do I use that example? Because in a relativistic world, two things happen. First, there is no objective truth. How do you resolve difficulties? Might makes you right. Now think about this in terms of what's going on in society today. It's not whether you are in sync with the Constitution or the other laws of the federal government or the state. It's whether or not you can shout louder, intimidate more, or actually attack people successfully to force them to back down. It is might that makes you right in a relativistic world, because you cannot use principle. And you will have folks on the side of relativism say, well, we just want more democracy and more freedom. Again, pay attention to their words, because what they're saying is going to be the opposite of what they do. This is going to be the case again and again. And pay attention to this form of it. In the mind of the very relativist governor of the state of Michigan and of California, it was important to keep people safe by closing the churches. But they made sure that the liquor stores and the marijuana stores remained open. You could go buy marijuana and alcohol, but you could not go to church, because they have a value, not to say a vested interest, in those other areas, more so than they do in church. But the way they live, I'd say that'd be the case. And we see another good example of this. Having lost the Supreme Court decision in favor of abortion, what are they doing now? The state of New York, or people like Senator Elizabeth Warren, formerly of Oklahoma, formerly Native American, what those folks are doing is attacking and doing everything they can to sue and shut down the places that take care of women in crisis pregnancies that want to keep their babies. New York is targeting the pro-life centers, and Senator Warren, filled with rage, watch the interview she did yesterday. She is filled with, we will close them. They are deceptive. They are lying. They are cheating. They're saving babies. They're helping women. They're giving care not only before birth, during birth, and after birth. But in their own relativism, they have to absolutely shut it down, because they are not open to other positions. And Warren and the governor of New York think that they've got the power, and their might will make them right. This is the reality that we deal with. And it shows up all over the place. This is a constant that might makes right. Second thing that is key for understanding our society and what's going on is that in a relativistic world, you have your truth, you have yours, I have mine, right? And the difficulty with that is there is no truth in between us upon which we can build a discussion, an argument, a position. We have nothing in common. In other words, relativism absolutely isolates everybody from everybody else. There is no possibility of communication if everybody has their own truth. I don't have any truth that I share with you. I don't have the law. And we see this in areas like grammar, where students for the last 25, 30 years have been told we are not going to impose the rules of grammar on young children in school. Let them express themselves any way they wish. And they write utter nonsense, and they don't know how to communicate. We are not going to say that math answers are ever wrong. This is the answer you have. And this is how you feel about 2 + 2. They send these fools out to go and give change or try to get it when they're in the store. And they have no idea. I'll never forget being at a wedding, and the bride's brother was 16. He was younger. And no, it was her nephew, her brother's son. And we were talking about something, and he said, so I said, well, figure it out. What's 7 times 6? And he's looking on his fingers. He said, I can't figure it out. I don't know. You're 16 years old. Sister Cordelia made me know that when I was 8 years old. By heart. And they don't know things like math or grammar, which have these rules that used to be considered objective, but in a relativistic world, it's all what you think or feel. When it then takes on to things like history and literature, where there are so many bits of fact and data that you have to sort them out, then the confusion is widespread. So that I urge you to study a little bit about Howard Zinn. Do you know that name? Oh, no, you need to know that name. Howard Zinn wrote the People's History of America. And his book is thoroughly filled with lies and deception. There's a lady who wrote another book refuting him. Take a look at that book. Read Zinn, and if what Zinn was saying were true, you would end up being as anti-American as the American Federation of Teachers has become, or some of the others, the students and other people. Of course, I would object to it, but then you find out the way they paste, that they cut and paste facts out. So when they criticized Columbus, this guy was killing Indians, he was terrible to the Native Americans, he was awful. No, they took a part where he said, we have to go to this other, to Puerto Rico. They didn't have a name yet, but we have to go to Puerto Rico and conquer those Indians. Why? Because they were enslaving the Indians on Hispaniola, and he went to protect them. But they combined it with something else he said, and they made it look like he was enslaving them. He wasn't. He was stopping the slave trade. And so this is something that you say, that's a totally different picture. No wonder we didn't hear about that when I was growing up, because it wasn't true. And it goes on and on with the history of Zinn, but that's the normal history out there. So there are a few things that I want to make mention of. A, we live in this pluralistic and relativistic world, and it's meant to divide us up. That is its purpose, to divide us into smaller groups by ethnicity, various sexual parts of identity, all these things that are meant to put us into tiny islands. And again, Any of you who've ever taught school, I have, especially high school, or you've raised teenagers, you know that the key is divide and conquer. That's one of the principles going on. So this division into everybody being an isolated unit makes it easier to intimidate us. Secondly, we have to become smarter than the relativists. It's not hard, but they're dumb on such a wide span of areas of knowledge that it's kind of hard. But to learn history, to learn our civics, to understand the way our society works, to learn about, if anybody in this country knows about the effects of dysfunctional families, it's the people in this room. What you were saying, Dina, about the number of people in prison, the percentage for men and women who have been sexually abused, who have been using drugs, probably related to it, this is typical, and how many of them come from homes where the parents were never married to each other. Those are the three biggest factors. And it's not race as much as it is whether your parents were married. You see the reality of breakdown of family. You can't just make up whatever you want. Kids' hearts are broken by these realities of messed up families. And they become broken-hearted adults in prison. We know that, we see it. And so we have a perspective to say, here's where intact family makes a huge difference. We're not going to make up family. And I guarantee you that you hear all the time, one of the biggest problems is the environment. And what's the biggest problem for the environment for the left? Overpopulation. So what are they doing? They are convincing people, including small children, to make themselves sexually neutered. They're convincing people to neuter themselves. They used to do it to inmates. Now they're convincing people outside to do it to themselves at early ages, because this is a population myth issue. And believe me, that's a myth. We may not see it. Your grandchildren will see by 2050 the collapse of world population. By 2075, China will be down almost 1 billion people. Russia is losing 1 million a year in population now. Japan admits 100,000 is probably more. The decline is on. So these people are crazy, but they're trying to have that type of control. And for us to be able to say we have values, and ultimately our values are not just how I feel about things. It's not my personal choice. It's not, my worldview versus yours. We are here because we trust that God is the source of truth. He has revealed that truth to us in sacred scripture, sacred tradition, and the magisterium of the church. And we have that three-legged stool to stand upon firmly. And we'll be there to help guide the church, to guide society, again, by the gospel. This is going to be our task. As opposed as they are to us, we have to be adamantly more for it. That's the reality. And not to let feelings get in our way. As someone you had said earlier, feelings are not a good guide. I had a lady in my studio audience one time ask me, Fr.Mitch, you ever learn any spiritual lessons when you hunt? And I said, yes, ma'am. One time I took a cotton ball and tied a string around it. I dipped it in some dough and estrus scent and tied it to the back of my boot. And I walked a path that I knew that some bucks had come. And I walked it, took it off my boot, hung it up in a branch, got in my stand, and waited for dawn. Sure enough, 11-point buck came in. His nose was on the ground. He was following that scent. He did not look up once until he got into the range of my rifle, and bam, knocked him down. He didn't move an inch. I told her, ma'am, the lesson you learn from that is, sex makes you stupid and then you die. Any counter opinions out here? You make your decisions based on feeling, you're going to be stupid, and you might die from it if it's that stupid. You know, again, we know folks in the prison, they come pretty close plenty of times. So this is the reality. The other thing I want to emphasize, contrary to our society, we have to teach people to think logically. I'm on my own jihad for good grammar. Why do I push good grammar? Not because I want people to sound polite and, you know, like they're fancy and they've been to... I don't care how they sound. It's a matter of doing two things. When you use English grammar correctly, you learn to think more logically. Aristotle pointed out in his book, The Logics, that grammar is the basis of logic. That's where you learn to think logically. It's also why the left hates grammar. So learn it all the more. Secondly, if you learn to use grammar correctly and speak the language well, you do something they don't do in Washington, namely, think before you speak. This is extremely important. Our society doesn't do those very well. So besides learning our faith as the basis for life's truth, learning logic, learning math, learning real science, not pseudoscience. You know, you have to have some pretty fancy surgery before any of us men are going to have a baby. Arnold Schwarzenegger did it in a movie. That's as close as we've gotten. No. We don't deal with fantasy. We deal with reality. And in that way, not only are we dealing with the concrete stories like Dina told us, but we're also working to counteract the folly that is destructive of society that would be imposed upon us from our own folks. This would be a great service to the people that we're with in the prisons and outside as well. Thank you.